looking at police reform at this moment when activists and protesters are demanding more action, and this despite President Trump signing an executive order on policing. They say it doesn't go far enough. Bestselling author Malcolm Gladwell has written extensively about race and policing over the years, including the 1999 police killing of Amadou Diallo right here in New York City. Gladwell is right now launching the 5th season of his popular podcast, Revisionist History. It's a podcast that touches on wide-ranging topics like art museums and elections and an Air Force general and the dragon from Hobbit, or I should say a dragon from Hobbit. And Malcolm Gladwell joins us now. Malcolm, good morning, and thank you for being here. It's a great podcast, and I think people like it because they like you. They like the way you think. And so while I have you, I'm hoping we can get your thoughts on some of the news of the moment. You're famously the author of Tipping Point. Do you think when it comes to reforming police in this country and healing race relations in this country, we have reached a tipping point?
Well, we're certainly a lot closer to a tipping point than in my memory. You know, one of the reasons in my last book, Talking to Strangers, I wrote about the case of Sandra Bland, one of those high-profile, sad, tragic encounters between an African-American and police. And I said in the book, the reason I wanted to talk about it is that we always have these incidents, and then they go away. We just go on with our lives. And this seems like the first time in a very long time that we're not content to go on with our lives. And that's incredibly encouraging.
That's an important moment. I mean, in Tipping Point, you say you only need 30% or about 30% of a population to start changing the views and the culture of the entire population. And I think the polls would suggest we're beyond that point. But let's talk a bit about how that change happens. One of the most memorable slogans from the demonstrations is defund the police. But then you've got Republican lawmakers saying, actually, we need more money for police because we've got to retrain them in these new ways. Which side of that conversation do you come down on? Where's the evidence?
Well, I'm on neither side at the moment. What I want to do is I want to sit down and let's decide what we want to do. How do we want to reshape law enforcement for the 21st century to respond to these very real social realities? Once we figure out what we want, how do we want to retrain people? How do we want? I love some of the ideas about changing removing certain responsibilities from the police. Why do armed police do traffic stops? Why do they do domestic disturbances? Why do they deal with the homeless? Those are all things that maybe we should create another force that deals with those kinds of social problems. And once we figured out what we want to do, then let's figure out whether it costs more or less. It's crazy to start with the question of money.
But money is going to be part of it. And if you're talking about changing the job requirements of police, I mean, when you look at it and you look at the evidence, do you think it's going to mean spending less on police or putting more money into it, at least in the short term, so that they can retrain and alter their behavior?
Well, I tend to be someone who's suspicious of the idea that you can fix something without spending money on it. It's a popular, lots of conservatives said for years things like the best way to solve, the problem with government was to starve government. I always thought that was a little crazy. And I try to think of my own life with a number of things that can be solved by spending less on them. And it's a small list. So I'm a little bit dubious that this is going to be a cost saving. Anyway, it's like I said, it's the wrong question. The right question is, how do we fix it? And then once we've answered that question, let's deal with the question of money.
Well, I mean, I think it might be the right question because if the people who are calling for defunding the police, the changes they want, you're suggesting may actually take a little bit of money up front to see those implemented. But I want to get you on something that's deeper and more important at the moment. In the book Blink, you make a very clear case for how we fall back on stereotypes when we're in a tight spot, when we have to think quickly. That certainly comes up in policing. So how can you take a lifetime of experience in an officer's mind and heart and somehow train that out of them through, implicit bias training or some kind of afternoon workshop?
I think there's a limited amount you could do with that kind of training. I mean, the evidence says that training is useful, but it's not the whole answer. I think we're going to have to end up doing 50 different little things and hope that they add up to something major. There's no magic bullet here. We're dealing with the cultures of policing and strategies of policing that go back many, many years, that are deeply ingrained in the law enforcement community. This is going to be a long, drawn-out process. There's no, we're not going to wake up next year and have solved this problem. This is why, the important thing here is for us to all understand this is a conversation we're going to have for years. And so let's start that lengthy, difficult conversation now and hope that we wake up 10 years from now and we've made significant changes in the way this problem unfurls.
So Malcolm, before you go, let me ask you quickly one question about the podcast. And I think I'm reading this correctly. You have an episode in which you make the case that people should be nihilist. Here we are talking about meaningful change. Isn't a nihilist somebody who thinks life itself is meaningless? Help me understand.
No. It's a tongue-in-cheek episode in which I go back and I talk to all the people I ever hired, and I figure out, am I a good hirer or not, right? Do I check all the boxes and do all the right things? And it turns out I'm a terrible hirer. And then I make a kind of tongue-in-cheek case for hiring people randomly. And it's funny, when I conceived of that, it was a sort of a joke. But now in the context of all this discussion we're having about racial equality, I wonder if it's a serious point.
Malcolm.
One of the things that is perpetuated...
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to make a blink-like decision here, Malcolm. We got 15 seconds before I'm going to have a hard wall and they're going to take us off. Meet me on Twitter and we'll keep the conversation going. Malcolm Gladwell, thank you very much for being here. The new season of Revisionist History launches tomorrow, and it will be available wherever you get your podcasts.